1998, I was sitting right there. This is a different table, different chairs, the walls are different color, it's exactly the same room. Computers didn't exist. And but just so just I tell you this because of this idea of the thread that Marianne was talking about that I want to mention. Because I was sitting there as a student in the Amazon seminar taught by Dr. Charles Wood. And that was right before I went down to Omni. I had just talked to my advisor who had talked me into doing my master's research in Brazilian Amazon instead of in Paraguay, which is where I'm sure I was going to do it. Okay, so when Marianne asked me to do this, I'm only going to take about 15 minutes. I'm going to leave time for Rich and then for questions and discussion. And Rich, it's great to see you.
Good to see you, John.
Okay, same very often. I wasn't sure what to think about because we've done so many things together. I didn't want to overwhelm and or bore yourselves. We're talking about tens and tens and tens of training courses, of meetings and summits and partnership, collaborative retreats, all sorts of things. So what I did is, I'm a little weird. I still use agendas, calendars, and every year I stick them in a bottom shelf in my office. So I have them from 1985 on, and I have them even before that when I was in the Peace Corps. So what I did is I just grabbed some of them from a few of the years. I just started going through the pages. And it was pretty enlightening. It was stunning, actually. And what I want to talk to you today about mostly is what Marianne referenced very briefly, which was PESAC, which is the Group de Pesquisa Extensão em Sistemas Agroflorestais, the agroforestry and extension, agroforestry research and extension group of OCTE. And the reason I thought I would talk about that is that Marianne mentioned that it was founded in 1990, is that right? And I want to briefly go back over how it was founded, and then what it did, and how I see it, and then how I see this whole thing that Marianne has described, probably throughout this whole course, in maybe a different way, which is really a giant community of practice that covers time and space and a network of people. And once you start thinking about it that way, at least for me, that's the only way it really makes sense in terms of how you can pull all this stuff together. And that's why I said that guy up there, Vini Marcus, who worked with an NGO, was in a course, became governor. That's how this has all worked over 30 years. Okay, so grad student, 1988, the Amazon seminar. Marianne, another faculty member, Pete Hildebrand, fairly recently deceased, who was a colleague who I understand you talked about in terms of the farming systems program. So you've got a little bit of that background about here at UF. And out of that grew this idea of a course in OCTE with the Federal University of OCTE. And Marianne, who was always thinking about how to bring people together, said, she was part of this course in OCTE. And she glossed over it, but as opposed to being, as she said, okay, we're going to do a training course in collaboration with the university there, she and a couple of other people talked about, let's expand this idea. It wasn't just that there weren't enough university professors, it was really this vision of, we can't begin to think about the problems of OCTE and how to address them if we don't get a lot of different voices from a lot of different perspectives. And that was a training course where people learned about farming systems and were introduced to the ideas of participatory research and actually talking to farmers and doing on-farm research and that sort of thing. But it was also an experiment, something really unique to OCTE, and I think it was really unique to most everywhere, where the people in that course were from all the different agencies, state and federal, who worked with, and NGOs who were working to try to change the state of OCTE back then when it was a little place. So you had people from research institutes, you had people from university, you had people from human rights NGOs, people who were working with rubber tappers, you had people who were like food scientists and that was their thing, and people who were breeding, I don't remember what, soybeans, and people who were out there marching, as Chico mentioned, all these people together who all walked by each other in the streets, but never actually sat down together. And when they brought these people together, I clearly remember this because I was just, I was, I guess, 29 or 30 or 28 or something like that. And I was there for the first time. I'm a gringo student in Acre. I'm not completely naive. I worked other places, but I was a complete outsider. So a lot of what Karen and my wife, we were kind of watching. And to see what happened when somebody from Embrapa, the agricultural research group, and IMPA, another research group, and NGOs, when they were talking to each other, when we would go out to the field and visit a farm or a colocação, a rubber tapper area, and they're all looking at it through their institutional eyes, and through either their São Paulo eyes, or their Acre eyes, or their Amazonas eyes, different places, and realizing they all saw these things differently, that they were all working on a different piece of it. And this, you could just see this emerge, this, oh my God, if we actually were working together, because I had no idea, you live over and work with it, I had no idea what you're doing. I had no idea what you do, how that relates. Can you imagine if we were all kind of on the same page and working together, what would happen? And that's why after the first course, which was, by course, this is a month long. These were pretty intensive things, every day for a long time. People became friends and kind of colleagues, and they requested a second one. They wanted a follow-up one the next year, 1989. And may have described this already, I don't know, so you stopped if I haven't. So we all came back. This time for us as students at UF, we were also going back to initiate research projects. And there was a second course, again, intensive, long, slightly different group of people, some repeat, some not. And at the end of that group, people looked at each other and said, we've got to do something. We don't want to just have these courses every year. Why don't we try to get together? And I'm going to way oversimplify, but Marianne kind of facilitating, working with the discussion, they came up with this idea of, let's start another organization, because the way things are structured right now, in the state government, I can't really work with Embrapa, and I can't really work with IFA, and I can't really work with this group and that group. But if we don't kind of have, a separate little club, we could talk to each other and work together. And that's where that idea came from. And Marianne offered, okay, this is you guys. This is Acreanos. You're going to do this. I can help by trying to get some funding. And that's how Pesaki was born. And when Pesaki was born, it was born from that energy and that connection that people had, and that idea, that vision they had. And the funding came at the time from USAID. And Marianne had connections as far as some programs. So they, which is sort of stunning now that I look back on it, they were willing to give money for this kind of wacky idea. And they actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, because my memory's not very good. They kind of funded two different initiatives. One, Pesaki in Acre, and the other, a research institute, which was with Chris Buell.
Oh, yes.
Ivan. And there were these two kind of competing visions of how you support the creative NGO. One was a US wonderful expert creating a very technical team of people that was going to produce knowledge. And the other, a group of people who were going to try to collaborate to solve problems. Very different. And it was over the course of many years, sort of an unspoken competition between these two visions of nonprofits for both AID and in Brazil. So, which one's going to really have the impact? Who's going to be long-term? And I'm clearly very, very biased, and COM's a wonderful organization. Always has been. But every time there would be a yearly AID meeting, they would always ask, so, how are you going to scale up? This isn't staying. That's great that you have 20 people working together. So look at these guys. They're producing this knowledge that's changing the world. What are you doing? It's not sustainable. And then what you see years later are secretaries, governors, and network across the Amazon. Enormous impact. I don't think it's ever really been documented. Okay, so what was Pesaki? And we know that I can't not and this probably is going to work. This time right here. screen, don't worry. So Pezaki was a nonprofit, an NGO, led by the people that I just described. They elected a council, they had the whole thing, they had an executive leadership team, they hired local people to be technicos and all that kind of thing. And as part of the deal with USAID, I don't always like what AID does. One of the things that they did, they said, okay, if we're going to fund something in Aki, I'm going to exaggerate the point here, you have to have an American there to sort of make sure everything's going okay. And Marianne wasn't going to move to Aki for 2 years. So for ex-grad students, first woman named Connie Campbell spent the first year helping Pezaki get started. And then I moved to Aki for a couple of years and spent the next couple of years working with them on everything from capacity building to organizational development to trying to help them solidify their approach to working with rural people, their approach to research and extension, all that kind of stuff. So up here, what happened as I went through all of these notes is it began to dawn on me that Pezaki was a lot more than sort of what I've always imagined it to be. And this is what I wanted to briefly talk about because I think it's kind of an interesting model as you think about the impact of Chico Mendes, because everything that Marianne and Maria Glitch talked about, if you take from 1990 to the mid to late 2000s, Pezaki, and because of that, me and other students and Marianne, we're kind of embedded in that context. So every one of those policies that was up there, okay, now we are going to make sure that local food goes to schools. We would either be impacted or putting that into practice. And I forgot about that, but I clearly remember meeting at Pezaki one afternoon, hey, there's this opportunity. They want to get food out to local schools. We're working with these local colonist communities. We can do that, and Pezaki is setting up this connection between food producers, people who process the food, and a local school. I don't know if it still exists, but for years it was enormous success. So I guess I'm trying to make the point that there's this link between these large-scale policies and ideas, but there are also people doing this on the ground, just usually generally invisible. Okay, so Pezaki, as mentioned, I worked there for a couple of years living there, embedded in it, and then for another decade, more than a decade, 10 or 15 years, every summer going back and working in different ways. And at the surface, it's an NGO focused on agroforestry and rural development. They were going out and introducing agroforestry systems to rural communities, colonists, Indians, and rubber tappers, and they were a rural development agency. So they were also really trying to, at the same time, they didn't just go out and here are seeds, here's how you set this up. They really worked with, okay, how can you work together as a community, gender issues, helping link communities with other resources, all that kind of community development stuff that most of you are really familiar with. So that's at the surface what they were. Second, they were a political actor. At the time that Marianne was describing, Brazilians, just forgive me, you know this and this better than I do, it was a really dynamic time because NGOs kind of burst up, popped up, emerged in the Amazon because of the lack of governance, because there were spaces that needed to be filled where people were not getting the attention, the help they needed. And all these sprouted up all over the place. And I don't know, I'm guessing Marianne knew this, I had no idea. So she was thinking about this as this all happened. I just thought, this is really cool. This is one of the most exciting things I've ever been involved in. The energy was just incredible. So all these different NGOs, and they were always networking. So they were, on top of all the regular work, there were always meetings in the city, locally, regionally, where all these different NGOs were getting together, a lot of times to complain about the government and lack of services, a lot of times to talk about these policies, but it was just very much a network just connecting all these people. And this is really important across the Amazon. Third, and linked to that, Pezaki served as a collaborative hub. That's what say bridging, not bridging, I don't know what writing is, but so you remember I was mentioning that Pezaki was made up of people from all these different organizations. That allowed them to bridge all these organizations. So you were working at the university, you can call someone who's a colleague over in Ngapa, and there's none of that institutional arguing or jealousy. People knew each other. So Pezaki also served, top of that, those two things, as this place where people could talk to each other and bridge. Fourth, it was a training center. And they offered training courses in their methodology. So they offered training courses in how to work with communities. They offered training courses in participatory research. They offered training courses in gender, all these different things. And you have to collaborate with them on many of these. And it was internal as they brought on students from the university to be stagiarios, which means interns, thank you, interns. And then as they grew and got funding from different proposals and things, they would hire people on as technical people, extension agents, researchers who go out and work with the communities. So they would train internally all these people. And it wasn't 5 or 6, this was a lot of people, some of whom later came and did graduate degrees at WEF. They did local training, so they would offer training for people in the town, in the city, all these different agencies. So they would bring people together. And then regional, because they would bring in people from other Amazonian states. So they were offering training in all these things to the internal, local, and regional level, which did 2 things. One, it offered capacity building, offered these new ideas, but also, again, helped create these networks. I don't do social network analysis, but it's a pretty fascinating case if you look at what happened to all these people. Fifth, and pretty soon showed up, it was an international portal. And what I mean by that is Marianne described Acre as being very isolated. It's a very different place now. But in the 1990s, it was pretty isolated. I didn't have the experience of no hotel, no shower when I got there, but we drove from the airport, and you only had to go maybe a kilometer in the city, and all of a sudden it was dirt roads and nothing. The city just ended. It's very different now, and therefore it was very difficult to communicate. So I just thought I'd throw out a couple of examples of what I mean by portal. So there was a program called LASPA, which had to do with offering scholarships for graduate training to people in Latin America. And they had a program specifically for those who didn't speak English, where they really wanted to get, in this case, Amazonians. We could get them English training, then get them trained at the university. They can go back and have a big impact. And a number of them came through here. So Pezaki sort of served as the hub for that, because the last time to come down, who do we talk to? Well, let's go to Pezaki. There are people there that understand gringos and speak English maybe a little bit and can help us with that. ECRAF, you know what that is? In Africa?
Yeah.
It's one of the CGISR centers, the World Agroforestry Center. They had an international program project, which might be for another class, because it's just a classic case of horribleness, called alternative to deforestation, where they're setting up these units around the world to look at alternatives to deforestation. So they came to Acre. They wanted to bring a bunch of people from all over the world and hold some workshops and go out to do some field work. So an NGO, a political actor, a collaborative hub, a training center, international porter, and this UF partner, which Marianne talked about. And what stunned me as I went through all this stuff was the number of back and forth trips, exchanges between UF and Pezaki, or through Pezaki. From every student in that long list of people who published and who would work through Pezaki, because Pezaki could help them and people trusted them and they would kind of vet them. They didn't want people coming in who were not capable of doing things. They wanted people who were going to sort of uphold the position of being really respectful and understanding and participatory approaches, all that sort of stuff. Pezaki people came here for training, for meetings, and lots of other organizations through Pezaki would come here. People would come there. It's just pretty remarkable to see, and many in the world of international women development, gender development kinds of things. So I really found it fascinating when I went through to see this whole thing over the course of 91, 90s when it started, all through, I would guess, the mid to late 2000s. Pezaki still exists in a much different way. And the other thing that really struck me as I went through this, how many of you have heard of Paulo Freire? Raise your hand. So he's a Brazilian educator, and he is really famous and well known for his vision of how do you train people and how do you teach people in a very specific way? And his critique back in the day was the way we teach people is we treat them like banks where we open up an account, we put stuff in, we close it, and they're supposed to learn. And his approach is very different. We need to engage with people and find out what's interesting and important to them, and then start by talking about that and establish this relationship. And through that relationship, then we can begin to teach and learn together. And he has this very famous quote, which I always loved, which is, only the student can name the moment of the death of the professor. And what he meant by that was that in a teaching relationship, can I use you? So she's my teacher and she's teaching me I speak Portuguese. And over time, first she has the knowledge I don't, but we're seen as equals. And as we share and get to know each other and I learn Portuguese, at some point in that relationship, suddenly she's not my teacher anymore. I know enough, and we've hit this point where we're together, and she on her own is self-actualized and can then go out and teach others. And I'm no longer a professor, I'm a friend, maybe even I'm a student at first now. And Peisaki is very much like that. And Marianne took a very Paulo Freirean approach, where early on, people, you have a 1-month course on farming systems, what do you do with that? You want to start an NGO, how do you do that? Where she was always very supportive and finding ways to provide the resources, intellectual training, meeting, funding for this group to keep it going and help it going, and kind of teaching. And over time, that relationship went from UF as partner, as in the Paulo Freire instructor partner, to the death of the professor and a very horizontal relationship. And then to a point where sort of it was almost the other way around, where Peisaki was really leading the way in teaching us, helping us think and learn a few things. So that's a very general overview of a very complicated thing. Just like any NGO, there are day-to-day things that they did, going out to communities and helping them train, helping them have retreats and planning and connect with people, all that sort of stuff. But this, I want to talk about Peisaki because it's really reflective of this entire UF-Octane relationship. It was inspired in part by Chico Mendes. And that picture she showed, I had no idea there was a picture of that. That was the first time I ever went out to the forest. Chico Mendes took me. Chico Mendes took me out to the forest the first time. Fun to say. And like Marianne, it was not, he knew Marianne. If I walked on the street, he would be like, hey, John. No idea who he was. Oh, that's the ring of the US. But he was, since this course is part about him, he was a really remarkable guy. I interacted with him many times, and he was just so open. And like Marianne said, willing to listen and talk to everything. Had a really clear vision and was really respected because he practiced what he preached and was non-judgmental and knew when to say this is wrong, when to say this is right. So that whole thing filters through Peisaki and these other projects afterwards, the Genesis project, I don't know if that was ever talked about, the Merge project, multiple projects after that. And for almost 30 years, UF has been involved back and forth in offering training.